So just really wanted to welcome everybody and also thank our sponsor, Tito's. They have been a longtime partner of NGC in this particular event. So we really appreciate their time and commitment to what NGC and what SOAR 365 are doing. So today is kind of informal. If you have questions as we introduce our panelists and our folks, feel free to drop those in the chat. We will have some time at the end of each of their segments for Q&A. So just kind of hold off on raising those hands till we get to that Q&A section. But if you want to drop questions into the chat, feel free to do that as well. We will take a quick break kind of in the middle so everyone can get up, stretch those legs, get some coffee and all that good stuff. And I should probably go back and introduce myself since you guys are like, who is this talking head? My name is Laura Faison. I'm the Chief Communications Officer for Goodwill of Central Coastal Virginia. That is my day job. And then I have been involved with the NGC, or the Next Generation Council, for almost 4 years now. 5 years, it'll actually be 5 years, I think, in January, and had the distinct pleasure of chairing for a couple of years. And this is my third or fourth year being involved with this particular event. So really excited to be here today to introduce you to some fantastic speakers. If you've not met these individuals, I'm not going to give them big introductions because a lot of that is what they're talking about. But really the theme today is around balance, which is kind of apropos as we are all sitting here on a Saturday morning, probably flinging breakfast at people a few minutes ago and then tuning in for this. So thank you for taking time out of your busy days to be here. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Kelly Mattingly, who is the chair of the Next Generation Council, to tell you a little bit more about NGC. Hey, Kelly.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad that you could all join us, and thank you for taking time out of your day to be here. So as Laura said, my name is Kelly Mattingly. I am the chair of the Next Generation Council. So I've been involved with the Next Generation Council, or NGC, for 3 years. I joined because I thought it was an interesting way to get involved with the community. So if you're not familiar with the NGC, I'd like to share that we are a group of young professionals supporting SOAR 365's mission of creating life-fulfilling opportunities for individuals with disabilities. So we evolved organically when a few young volunteers wanted to do more for SOAR 365, and some of our early endeavors included socials, done-in-a-day projects, and fundraising. The NGC is also credited for establishing SOAR 365's annual summer series, which we had this June and July at Park 365, as well as our NGC Leadership Workshop. So currently we have around 20 members ranging in ages from 21 to 45, and our activities are based upon 3 core pillars that guide each year's course of action. So SOAR 365 service projects, leadership development, and engagement and fundraising. So during my short time with NGC, I volunteered for special events, led a committee, and currently chair the council. If you're looking to get involved, NGC may be a great fit for you. We encourage you to learn more about NGC. Please reach out to SOAR 365's events coordinator, Adelia Bendel, for more details. Her contact information is in the chat. Again, thank you all for being here today, and I look forward to our workshop.
Thank you, Kelly. And now I know who to call to write all of my introductions for things. That was fantastic. So thank you for that. So with that, we will pivot over to our first speaker today. Like I said, I'm not going to give him a huge introduction because I know he's going to get into it a lot, but Jeff Conley is the System Supplier Diversity Advisor for the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. And I am reading from this because it's a fantastic bio. As an advocate for business development and supplier diversity, who provides a wealth of expertise in his role to the National Procurement Office. With this role, he is really focused on diversity in that system supply. So I'm sure we'll get into that as well. But strategic direction, initiatives and processes, tracking success and mitigating risk. That's a lot. In his spare time, which I'm not sure he has much of, he is very actively involved in both SOAR 365, but then also the Metropolitan Business League with another great colleague of mine, Floyd. So with that, Jeff, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Laura. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. I've heard it said before, and now I claim it as my own. I'm not my resume, I'm my work. And clearly my work has been quite fulfilling to this point. I'm excited about being a part of this program today. I don't get too many invites to be a part of young people events. So I was excited that you invited the gray guy to be a part. But my comrade, Ro Mead and I were challenged or charged with answering 3 questions as we talked a bit about ourselves. And those are, what do we do professionally? What is our volunteer story? And how do we balance them both? And so professionally, as you heard, I'm the System Supplier Diversity Advisor for the Federal Reserve Bank. I've been in that role about 2 years. And supplier diversity is a business strategy where we develop, incorporate, and encourage the use of diverse-owned businesses within our supply chain and also in our business practices. I started my career as a banker right out of college, graduated from HBCU, Norfolk State University, behold the green and gold, uh, and went into banking. And that was very fulfilling. I did that for a long time. And from there, took a bit of a turn and went into healthcare. And no disrespect to anyone who works in healthcare, it just wasn't my thing. So I went back to what I was familiar with, which was banking. And for all the bankers, we do understand you can only balance so many checkbooks, until you find out maybe there's something different. And I was afforded an opportunity to work for a national nonprofit, and that was the National Minority Supplier Development Council. I was hired here for the local affiliate as the corporate development director. And that provided me the opportunity to, one, position the services of the Minority Supplier Development Council to be able to speak with businesses nationally about the utilization of minority-owned businesses. Now, I'll tell you, I started my banking career and thought I was going to end my career as a banker, but it was a delightful diversion, right? I was able to work with a lot of supplier diversity folks throughout the country, and I gained a real insight and a yearning, if you will, to do more of that work. That translated into me being able to obtain a position here in one of our local governments as a minority business coordinator. And then from there, facilitating a SWAM program, SWAM being Small Women and Minority Owned program for Henrico County, which is where I live and was pleased to work for about 5 years. And then the Federal Reserve came calling. So it was a blend of all of my career choices, both from the banking and supplier diversity, which I had been in for over a decade. So I've been with the Fed about 2 years, excited about the opportunities there, excited about the work that I've been able to do. And not only that, what I will do. Now, because I know we're with friends and it's a Saturday, I would offer a bit of transparency in that even in this role, I do sometimes slip into a little bit of imposterism, right? That's that infamous imposter syndrome, where I will admit I'm a bit of a perfectionist. And when things aren't perfect, I hold myself really accountable. But one of the things that I've learned, particularly from great mentors and great folks in my life, is, I measure it all based upon those thoughts. Are they facts or feelings, right? Is it a fact that I may not be equipped, or is it just a feeling? And so often, sometimes daily, I have to remind myself that, I'm a brand and I am my brand. And as a result of that, I am qualified. I have the experience, I have the education, the fortitude and the passion. So I remind myself often that I'm qualified. So I would hope that if those of you who are participating today, if you took nothing else away, and I know you'll take a lot, recognize that you're qualified, right? You're qualified to be in the rooms that you're in, qualified for the job, the relationships, and so forth, because I constantly remind myself of that. My volunteer story began a lot like many of you, I'm sure, in my church, right? We get lots of free labor from church, right? But that is fulfilling as well. a part of the volunteer journey for me also was my access to board assignments. And as Laura said, I've had the opportunity to be on the board for SOAR365. I'll save that until last, but also the Metropolitan Business League. Not only did I have the good fortune of working for the Minority Supplier Development Council, I was able to be on that board and chair it. Up until the point of SOAR365, most of my volunteer activities were occupational in nature. And so I say that to say that most of the volunteer work that I was doing, particularly by way of board assignment, was related to my job. So on both of those boards, I was an advocate for small businesses and also the utilization of minority-owned businesses in our supply chain. But as a part of the Leadership Metro Richmond program, which I'm really proud to be a 2020 alumni, and anyone who knows Leadership Metro Richmond knows that everybody considers their class the best class. And so I was the best class, i.e. the class of 2020. And a really dear friend of mine, Vanessa Hampton, was a part of that class. And Vanessa and I had conversations about our lived experiences, right? Where we had come from and what we had done and our families and all of those things. And I shared with her that I'm a twin. And as novel as that is, and as much as proud as I am of that, that my twin is special needs. And so that I was very much, I was reared very much as a protector as it related to my brother. And so we talked much about that and how that is one of my proudest achievements, being the big brother to my brother who was born 10 minutes before me, but being the big brother to him and helping meet his needs along with my parents. And she said to me, Jeff, I have a friend who works on a board that you might be interested in knowing more about. And she said, are you familiar with SOAR365? And I said, oh my gosh, absolutely I am. And I shared with her the history, at least from my family's perspective. The mission of SOAR365 is creating life-fulfilling opportunities for individuals with disabilities. But I also feel like SOAR creates opportunities for the families of those with disabilities. And my family is just one of those examples, because we became acquainted with SOAR365 as a result of my brother being able to come here to Chesterfield, to Camp Baker annually for the summer camp. And he looked forward to it. My mother looked forward to it. I didn't look forward to it as much because I had to do the Sharpie and label all of his supplies that he was bringing. And I think that's why I hate the smell of Sharpie today. But nonetheless, we were very comfortable in knowing that for the week that my brother was here and away from home, and again, as protectors, right? We want to make sure that our families are well taken care of, that the SOAR365 staff here took care of our loved one as well as we would. And so that introduction was made. I was able to tell my story and how SOAR had benefited my family, and assumed a board position here at SOAR. And I say to folks all the time that SOAR365 is my passion project, right? It's my way to give back. It's to honor my brother. It's to honor my family, my mother. She always wants to know when's the next SOAR365 meeting. And she sometimes does not understand that I do have to work, right, to be able to participate. But that's just how dedicated we are as a family unit to SOAR365. And so that's the proudest part of my volunteer story. And when I think about balancing it, balancing both professional assignments and a volunteer, I mean, I guess I would have to say that if you don't find balance, imbalance will find you, right? So you really have to be able to strike a good balance as it relates to a volunteer assignment. Some of the things that I think about is, if that giving back becomes a burden, then maybe it's a different route that you may need to take. So it should be a joy. It shouldn't be a burden. I also think that relative to volunteer resources and the abilities are, what do you bring to the table? So every board assignment that I look at, I have very in-depth conversations, and I would encourage you to, as it relates to volunteer assignments, what can I bring? Or what is the need for this particular organization that I can provide or become a resource? I also think time management becomes a thought on achieving that balance, right? We only have so many hours in a day, and if we're gainfully employed, we have to be good employers. But the part that I also love about looking at opportunities is making your employer a part of that decision, right? So every board that I've served on, I've had the support of my employers, either through time allocation to be able to attend board meetings, or recognizing that there may be meetings or appointments that I'll participate in during the business day. So ensuring that you have the appropriate support is critical. And that's not only your work, because my work certainly, my employers certainly have been very supportive, but it's your family, or whatever your relationship community looks like, to be able to say, from 10 until 11:30 on September 21st, I'm going to be occupied sitting in front of a computer, but it's a part of my volunteer. I'm not being paid to do it. So ensuring that you have those appropriate resources, I feel, are critical to that. And that's how you balance. In this year of 2024, rather than have a resolution, I determined I had a word, and that word was boundaries, right? So for 2024, my word is boundaries, and boundaries is not a curse word, right? It's really a good thing. Establishing boundaries, both professionally and in my relationships, boundaries for my health, to be able to be better suited. And so anyone who knows me now knows that I am practicing my no muscle, right? So I'm exercising my no muscle, recognizing that no is a complete sentence, because I can't do everything and can't be all things to all people. The real benefit to that exercise on practicing that no is that it makes my yeses that much more valuable, right? And that much more important to me. So I may be saying no to things, but what I'm saying yes to is really fulfilling and empowering me in another way. So that's what I feel, in a nutshell, for the most part, is a good balance, a good way to strike a balance if we're looking at professional versus volunteer assignments. So I know I went on for a while there. I hope I'm staying in time. I do have notes over here, so I wanted to stay on script, which I don't often do, but I'm happy to answer any questions that may be out there currently.
Thank you, Jeff. That was wonderful. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to come off mute and ask those or drop them in the chat. I have now got an entire list of quotes by Jeff of things that I'm going to go back and
You're
write
very
down.
kind. Thank you.
Yeah. Jeff, one I'll ask you while we're waiting on others to come off mute. You talk a lot. Do you find yourself in your day job talking about your passion for SOAR, or your passion? Do you find that becomes a regular part of your conversations with work colleagues?
Laura, that's a great question. It absolutely is. And it opens the door, one, for awareness, right? Growing up with a special needs loved one, it's not always a conversation that is easy to understand, right? Because if you're not in that situation, you don't understand the particular needs. You're not able to understand the sacrifices that families make. And I will say willingly make, right? That's just Jeff's story. But you're right, particularly from my involvement with SOAR365, it is a way to create awareness, and to also, tell my story, and the benefits that are numerous that my family has been able to experience. So I also believe that that's a part of being within a volunteer organization, okay? So if we're talking, in this situation, board service, so I believe that we have to, as board members, be advocates for our organization, right? Our organizations. And so being able to sell the organization and, communicate the benefits is critical. And so, yes, it's always an opportunity for me to be able to talk about the great work that we do here.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks for that question.
Any other questions for Jeff?
Jeff, I have a question for you. First off, thanks for speaking today, taking the time out of your day. Really appreciate it. I'm also a twin myself, so I like hearing those stories, and people seem to think that's not ever an interesting fact, but I'll sympathize with you. My question is, you kind of touched on a little bit about balance between work life and then volunteer work. And I want to expand on that a little bit, because I find myself, when you kind of throw in personal life to that equation, having a hard time prioritizing kind of just where to put my time. And it's one thing, I think, as a young adult that I've struggled with, and I kind of wanted to hear maybe some coping is not necessarily the right word, but some tactics that you kind of employ to really put your time in the right places. And I find myself saying yes to a lot of things, more out of feeling of like disappointing someone or disappointing an organization. And I just wanted to see if you have any takes on, how to make sure you're putting your time and attention in the right place.
What a great question. And thank you for being so vulnerable. I feel very much like you, so it must be a twin connection, right? I sometimes think that if I have to tell someone no, then I feel bad, right? Because, we want to say yes. I wouldn't say that we're people pleasers, but we definitely want to make sure that, our relationships are strong. I think a part of the balance, achieving the balance, is if it's an opportunity, one way would be if you can invite friends or significant others to participate with you, right? In whatever initiatives or volunteer engagement, so that it becomes an extension not only of your volunteer service, but it becomes an extension of your relationship with whoever that might be, right? That may not always be the case, right? When we're involved in outreach in our jobs, we can't always include our families. It's not appropriate. We can't always include significant others. It's not always appropriate. But I do believe that in those situations where we can, I would suggest, and not that Jeff's giving any relationship advice here, but I would say making those moments special when you're not involving yourselves in volunteer events, so that when home is good, that everything else will kind of flow out of that, because we do spend so much time. The bulk of our time is spent at home, but we want to make sure that everything is good and how we balance our relationships. And I think if you, much like you just said, speaking from your heart, when you are succinct in your no, I say no as a complete sentence, but sometimes you have to be able to say, I just don't have the bandwidth currently. And I would love to help.
Yeah, saying no is hard.
Yeah. You always want to have there's not necessarily a script out there for saying no, but I do think that given our busy lives, that you have to say no. Otherwise, you won't have any control of anything, either professional or. I hope that helps.
Jeff, I'm going to put this in the chat, but just for the benefit of those who might be watching this after the fact, I just think your phrase, my no's make my yeses that much more valuable. I'm going to get that tattooed somewhere. Like, maybe I probably should put it on my forehead so everyone sees it. But just
Absolutely.
seriously, I love that. And I think that's that's something too, I think, I say we, I'm not a young professional anymore. But as you move on in your career, you start giving those yeses so much to your career. You mentioned it with your own, career focused volunteerism, right? And things like that. And again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's one of those things you do to both get up the ladder and because you want to help in your profession. But I think it's easy when you're younger to get on that train and leave behind some of the things that really might mean a lot to you. So I think that's a really valuable lesson, not just for those who are older like me that need to say no more, but also I think even for those who are making some of those first choices, I think that's a really important lesson. And I don't have a question. I just wanted to really point that out. I think that's a great point.
I would agree wholeheartedly, Dean. And I would say, like yourself, I'm not a young professional, but my twin buddy who answered that question, I think you're on the right track, because if you already have that much awareness now, it's certainly going to make your career choices, your volunteer choices that much easier, having that much awareness going into it. And to Dean's point, oftentimes when we are young, we want to do everything. We feel like we have to be a part of everything, and or that it's going to make or break our career. But typically we learn way too late that it doesn't take all of that, that if we're dedicated and committed where we are, those things. I have a picture on my wall over there, and I see it all the time, and it says, "Your journey is unfolding exactly as it should be." Now, Dean, don't get that tattooed because that's not mine, right? But really, your journey is unfolding exactly as it should be. And I'm a strong believer in that.
That's great stuff. Great conversation. Any other questions for Jeff? And we will have some time later on at the end of the program when we do, and some additional questions that Dean and I are jotting down on the side. So if you think of anything, please drop those in the chat.
I have a question.
Anyone? Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm a graphic designer and I can get behind projects and get really excited about them. But sometimes I struggle to keep that motivation for my work. And I think when I'm volunteering or working for a nonprofit, or even like I volunteer design work often, I get so excited about that I want to put all my energy toward that. And I kind of like you struggle with imposter syndrome and knowing my own capabilities. And so I feel so much more comfortable working for free for people than asking for money. And maybe that's because I am an older sister and I have a lot of similarities to your story. But yeah, I guess I'm wondering how do you recommend valuing your own work and getting more comfortable with the money talk and just not giving everything away for free? That's where the balance is hard.
That's great. The money talk is never easy. The money talk is never easy. And I think, like yourself, we want to give, right? When you understand your value, Grace, and you understand your worth, right? Again, you're qualified. And there is a cost to expertise and experience. I did get the feedback from a mentor when I was working so very hard on various boards that don't get burnt out, right? Because often in nonprofits, there's not enough resources. And so typically from a nonprofit standpoint, we lean on resources like you, Grace, who are excellent in your work and an ability to be able to do that. But you don't want to get burned out. The money conversations, again, like I said, are never easy. But I think the more that you build, you become more comfortable in having those conversations and addressing those issues head on. And I think that any organization, any volunteer group that would be looking to solicit your services would be amenable to that and understand that there's a cost to be paid. You know, we can't do everything pro bono, but certainly knowing that, like I said earlier, you're qualified. So always lead with that. I hope that helps.
It does. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, Grace, coming from a similar background, especially early in a career, it's so easy to say and want to say yes to all of those requests because they feel very well intentioned. Trust your gut, right? If you feel like you're involved with a group or an organization that is suddenly asking a bit too much too often, it might be a time to take a step back and respectfully say, you know, I'm at my capacity right now, or, you know, to Jeff's point, just a no, I don't have the bandwidth right now. That's perfectly fine. So great question there too. Any other questions for Jeff? All right, well, we'll let you off the hot seat for a little bit, Jeff. Thank you so much. We sincerely appreciate it. And with that, we will transition over to our second speaker, who equally has an impressive resume. Ro Mead is the president and CEO and founding partner of Synergy Technical. As a leader of technology consulting firm and innovative and progressive technology solutions, she stays abreast of new and emerging technologies and trends and is widely recognized as an expert in disruptive technologies. I love that. I love disruption is fantastic. But she is currently in several board roles. She's the immediate past chair of the VCU IS Advisory Committee. She's a board member of the RAM Athletic Fund, and she is the board secretary for SOAR365. So with that, Ro, I will hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Following Jeff, I'll tell you, I am not as insightful as Jeff. So I'm just going to tell you that right now. It is very funny to me. And Jeff, I know you can appreciate this. When you get asked to do something like this, it's an absolute honor, but you have this moment where you think, when did I become the wise old person in the room? Like, how did that happen? Because life just goes so fast. So my story is this weird mix of my volunteer story and my professional story, and how the universe really puts you in the right place at the right time. And to Jeff's point, you're going to land where you need to land. And that might be for that particular opportunity, or that might be for sort of kind of your overall life's journey. And so my story is definitely that. So a little bit about me professionally. I'm going to attempt to answer the same 3 questions. I do have my notes in front of me also, because I'm old and I forget things. I see Jeff laughing, and I know you appreciate this. So I am the CEO of Synergy Technical. We are a technology consulting firm that's headquartered in Richmond, Virginia. And my identity, and I suffer from imposter syndrome like everybody, my identity is incredibly wrapped up in Synergy Technical as the founding partner. We are about 14 years old, and we do business all over the world, incredibly all 50 states and over 70 countries. And I do sit on several nonprofit boards. I'm also very involved with several nonprofits, both because they are our customers or because I have a personal relationship with them. So I was on the board. I was the board chair for Tablespoons Bakery, which is a nonprofit that provides both supported employment, but internships for individuals with developmental disabilities. I'm very involved with the Virginia Home for Boys and Girls, which is another great organization. In Circle, which was formerly Lutheran Family Services of Virginia. They provide a number of things, schools for kids that can't be in the public school system because of developmental disabilities, adoption services, foster care services, so all of that. So my personal passion and the boards and the nonprofits that I tend to get involved with are with populations that I feel like are overlooked. And that can be individuals with disabilities, that can be maybe kids that grow up in neighborhoods where they don't have the same advantages of kids that maybe grow up in other neighborhoods, disabled veterans. So I really like to get involved with the organizations where it feels to me like when someone sees them, they look past them, if that makes any sense. And that really starts with the very first organization that I volunteered with. And for those of you who work with SOAR365 or involved with SOAR365, this is going to hit home so hard that this full circle moment. So my very first real volunteer experience, you know, I was a brownie, and so I sold cookies and kind of all that fun stuff. That's volunteering, but it's, in my mind, it's not really volunteering. My real first volunteer experience was when I was about 14 years old, which was in the early 80s, was for an organization called Camping Unlimited. And Camping Unlimited was founded in 1957, and they ran a camp called Camp Creme. Camp Creme was in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Unfortunately, it burned to the ground about 4 years ago, so they have relocated it to Yosemite. But Camp Creme provides a full camping experience to campers of all abilities from the ages 5 to about the ages of 60. Sound familiar to anybody? Yes. So my first experience with them, I was a junior counselor, and the first thing that I did was, I can remember it vividly, the very first volunteer opportunity I had, I went on a field trip with them, with some kids with Down syndrome, and kids being anywhere between 5 to 25, really, with Down syndrome, to the aquarium in Santa Cruz, which are kind of right outside of Santa Cruz. And I had never been around young people with Down syndrome. That was not anything that I had ever had any experience with. And back in the early 80s, there were probably more prejudices then and less awareness than there is now. And so the experience that I had, I was put very specifically in charge of 2 twins, these 2 young women that were probably 10 years older than me, that both had Down syndrome. And it was the most surreal thing to me, because we were wandering through the aquarium looking at stuff, and I could see people looking at them and then turning away. And it absolutely just broke my heart. It broke my heart. And I thought, how can people not understand that these are 2 really, really amazing, you know, for me then they were adults, but amazing people that are just being treated in this awful way. And so I got fairly involved with Camping Unlimited, and over the course of a year did a lot of volunteer events. Actually ended up in this weird twist of fate becoming really good friends with the family, the parents of these 2 young women. So I had the privilege of, you know, if the parents wanted to go out on a date night, I would be the babysitter. I obviously wasn't babysitting babies, but I was with them. And it was just this great experience. And so they asked me, and I was really the youngest counselor, they asked me to go be a counselor over the course of a summer at Camp Creme. And it was a transformative experience in my life for a whole bunch of reasons. I learned so much about the family side and what the families were not dealing with, but the unique challenges that families that support individuals with disabilities have. I got to know so many amazing young people. My dad probably didn't enjoy it, but met my very first boyfriend, so that was pretty cool. So it was, again, just a life transformative experience. And that really set me up. I want to make sure I'm keeping an eye on time here. That really kind of set me up for the rest of my life. Now, I'll tell you that I have always had a passion for the disability community. I didn't start my work there because I really wanted to go make some money and build a career. And I love the nonprofit community, but it wasn't it wasn't the place for me to get started. So I, much later on, moved to Virginia. I moved to Virginia in 1996, I believe. So I've been here for quite a while. I was an ERP consultant. So if you don't know what ERP systems are, ERPs are the back-end systems that run businesses. I was an ERP consultant and did that for a number of years. And then I took a position first as the IT director, but then as the CIO for a company called AMF Bowling, which Jeff and I have a mutual friend who was part of my team there. And then really moved into AMF Bowling kind of separated out into a bunch of different companies. And I worked with this dude named John Walker, who ended up taking the CEO position of one of the sister companies. He came to me and asked me if I would be his chief information officer. I sort of laughed at him at first and said, I don't want to work for you. You're kind of a jerk. And I teased, but John and I are dear, dear friends, but that was sort of the conversation. So really transitioned into working for, as the CIO for this company. And I'm bringing that into this story because you'll see how everything really comes full circle. So I worked as the chief information officer for Cubic AMF until about 2011. And in 2011, I sort of had this itch that I wanted to go back into the consulting world. Consulting is really an interesting role in that you work with a lot of different companies, and so you learn a lot. Every company is different, and when you're, particularly if you're in the ERP space, you really start to understand the business functions of that. So I kind of got this itch that I wanted to go back into consulting, and I quote unquote spun up an LLC. So I really got onto the State Corporation Commission site and registered this LLC named Synergy Technical. And picked that because synergy is the biggest buzzword in the world. And I thought everybody would have at least thought they'd heard of us, I guess is the best way to put that. And it's still to this day, people think they do. But in all of that, I was still working for Cubic AMF, and I hadn't really made up my mind about what it was that I was going to do. I just knew that I was going to go do something else. I have a dear, dear friend, Kathy Redford, who amazingly, Jeff, this is going to be the weird circle of Richmond again, lives next door or lived next door to your friend Vanessa, because Richmond is small. And she was in the technology leasing space. And in her travels in the technology leasing space, she had fallen into leasing to the nonprofit community. And in the nonprofit community, sometimes cash flow is an issue. So we don't necessarily buy, but we lease assets. So she met this amazing woman named Julie Swanson, who was the CEO of an organization called Lutheran Family Services. And they got to chatting, and Julie confided in her, and she said, look, I'm leasing all this technology. I don't even know if I need this technology. I don't know. I just am so uncertain about our IT environment in general. And again, Lutheran Family Services, what they do, they're now in Circle, but they provide supports for individuals with developmental disabilities specifically. So they have about 7 schools, which are called the Minnick schools in the Roanoke area. They run foster care. They have day supports. They have group homes. So all of this stuff. So Julie and Kathy got to talking, and Julie said, I need someone to talk to that I can explain my IT concerns to. And I need to just be able to bounce this off of somebody that is disconnected from this situation that can give me advice on what we need to do. And so Kathy reached out to me, and I was working at Cubic AMF at the time still. Kathy reached out to me and she said, hey, would you mind just sitting down and having coffee with this woman, Julie, and seeing if maybe you can give her some advice? And so in one of those fateful, the universe puts you in the place that you need to be at that time moments, I went and I had lunch with Julie Swanson and a guy named Ray Radke, who is now the CEO of Encircle, but he was the chief operating officer at the time. And this lunch turned into, we were at Panera, and it turned into this 4-hour meeting where we walked through all of the concerns that Julie had around IT and what they were doing and what their plans were, and you know, how they were going to move forward. And they had a very small IT department at the time. I think there were only 2 people in IT. And I had this moment, and, you know, again, we all suffer from imposter syndrome. And I had this moment where I thought, you know, I always wanted to do something amazing. When I was young, I was like everybody. And I thought, you know, I want to do something that's going to change the world. And then I got into technology. I'm not Elon Musk. I'm not Bill Gates. I'm not any of those people. I got into technology and I implemented business systems. And that's what I did. And that was great. But it didn't change the world. It you know, it made people money. So I had this moment where I thought, through some weird circumstances, have the unique set of skills that I can actually help this organization. Like, I know how to build out an IT organization. I know how to look at technology, assess whether it makes sense for the business. I know all about business process redesign. I know about all these things. And I could really, really help here. And I knew that. I knew I could really, really help. And so I went home and I had some conversations with my husband, and it was scary because when you're sitting in the CIO position for a pretty big company, I was making good money. You know, I was like, okay, I'm making good money. I'm at the top of the IT food chain here. I could have left and gone to work for a much bigger company, but I think I really want to quit my job. And I think I want to go help this little tiny nonprofit. And I'm going to do it for like this much money. And so Jonathan, my husband, and I, we talked about it for a bit, and I mulled it over for a few days. And then I thought, you know, this is what I want to do. I know it's what I want to do. It's what I want to do. And so I went to John Walker and I said, John, I have this opportunity to, you know, to start this business and to help this nonprofit. And I know that I'm sort of leaving you in a lurch if I leave, but this is what I want to do. And God bless John Walker. John Walker looked at me and he said, Ro, you're going to be successful in whatever you do. I support you 100%. And I had his endorsement. And that for me was like one of the most important things that could have ever happened. So I quit. I hired a couple people. We started working with Lutheran Family Services. John hired me as a consultant part-time, so I still had some money coming in, which was really, really great. And we built this firm, Synergy, and that's why I say it's sort of all wrapped together. For the early days of Synergy, we focused primarily on nonprofits. So our whole business model was, we're gonna do digital transformation for nonprofits. And so we worked with Encircle, we worked with UMFS, we worked with Child Fund International, we worked with Operation Smile. And through this work that we did, Microsoft, who is one of our partners, started to really notice us. And so Microsoft actually ended up doing a video case study on some of the work that we did with these nonprofits, which just threw us into the stratosphere. I mean, when Microsoft, and what literally happened was Microsoft did a video case study on us that was played at their worldwide partner conference and was used to introduce Satya Nadella, who is the CEO of Microsoft. And so like everybody in the technology community saw this, and it just positioned us so well. So then, you know, we got bigger, we started hiring more people. And I always had this thought that as part of this, we don't want to lose who we are, and we want to continue to give back. And so while we started adding commercial clients to what we were doing, we really built this community engagement focused organization. And we said, okay, as an entity, we're always going to select nonprofits that we choose to work with. We may choose to work with them for free. We may choose to work with them at discounted rates. A lot of it's going to depend on the situation, but we want to make sure that while we're continuing to do this corporate work, we're doing this nonprofit work that is really, really impactful and can really make a difference. And so that's what we did. And so now 14 years later, incredibly, we're this amazing organization that is really staffed by people who are very purpose driven. And so everyone on my organization is focused on, okay, we might be doing technical work for Staples or Avon or somebody, but that's enabling us to either do technical work for a nonprofit or potentially do charitable contributions for nonprofits. It's giving us the skills where we can go and do some really, really amazing things. The really funny thing about this whole story, and again, things just come full circle, is that when John Walker left Cubic AMF and went to work for SOAR365, he called me and he said, hey, I'm interviewing with this nonprofit. Would you be a reference for me? And would you mind talking to the board of directors and telling them a little bit about me? And so I actually did a call with the board of directors, which I was not on, as a reference for John Walker. And it just felt to me like this is this weird circular thing that happens in the world. So when he asked me to join the board, of course, I was immediately, I will do anything for John, and he knows that. He teases me, but I will absolutely do anything for him. But so I go back to the universe absolutely puts you in the right place at the right time, and it sets you up for what you're supposed to do. And for me, I'm in a very unique position because I run an organization that I get to choose what we're going to do and who we're going to impact and how we're going to do that. Our goal is to give away $1 million a year. We will get there for sure. And that's how everyone I surround myself with at the organization is driven. So things that I've learned along the way, it's funny because I came to the same point really that Jeff did. I think that no matter what your role is, you do have the opportunity to give back. You can take your particular unique set of skills and you can give back, using those skills. That's what I've found. I do have people come to me all the time wanting us to get behind things or to support things that we just don't have the capacity to do. I don't have the capacity to do. My team doesn't. So it's funny because this is the year that I've started saying no also. You just have to if you want to be impactful. I think that people that are passionate about helping other people have a tendency to put themselves last. And that can be really, really wearing on you. And so if you find yourself where you're just giving back too much, you're not giving back anymore. You're taking away. And I think everybody needs to recognize that. You can spread yourself too thin. And if you agree to do something or to support an organization and you can't do it to the capacity that they need it, they really might be better served to have somebody else. And that's the truth. So today I continue to volunteer and I continue to point synergy resources at various organizations, but I'm very purposeful in doing that. There are lots of organizations that we would love to support, but we just don't have the capacity to. I get asked to join boards all the time. At this point, if it's not something that I'm very specifically, very passionate about, I'm not going to say yes. And in order for me to say yes, I need to take away from something else. And so it becomes a real decision for me. But that's what I have. It's a lot of rambling. And,
it's great. It's great
again,
stuff.
Life comes full circle. It's crazy.
It does. It does. Do we have any questions for Ro? I got to pull up my notes. I'm seriously going to have to go back and reread all of this stuff. One of the things that I think you hit on, Ro, that was really I found a personal connection to was you were talking about your identity being incredibly wrapped up in your work. And I think one of the things I had it written down later for our fireside chat, but I'll pose it to you and Jeff now. I think a lot of times, especially as young professionals, you come out of college or you come out of whatever your post-secondary life looks like, expecting to land where you will be forever, right? You know what you're going to do. That path is clearly defined. And what both of you have said has illustrated you have to have various experiences to get you to that spot where that's where you need to be. That's where your purpose is. And I thought that was just kind of a neat parallel between the two of you. Ro, you talked about, technology was your jam. Like that was really what drove you early on in your career, but there was always that itch right in the back to go back to that purpose. Not really a question, but it was just kind of an observation listening to the two of you talk about your respective journeys. I think that's, I know in talking to young professionals on a regular basis, that's, they come out gangbusters, right? They're going to your point, Ro, they're going to change the world. And it takes those lived experiences, I think, to do that. So any other thoughts on that, for someone who's just entering a career?
Yeah, I mean, I can comment on that. The thought process that I have always had is, my great grandmother lived to be 107. She lived to be very, very old, and was an amazing woman. And we spent a fair amount of time with her when I was young, and she always said, I didn't want to regret this when I was older. I didn't want to regret not doing this thing or not having this experience. And so for me, whenever I get confronted with a choice or with an opportunity, I always look at it and say, if I choose not to do this, not if I choose to do it, but if I choose not to do this, am I going to be 90 years old looking back thinking, okay, I had this opportunity to do this thing and I didn't do it? And that for me was literally exactly the thought process in starting Synergy and really taking that first leap was, I don't want to be at the end of my life and think I had this opportunity to really make an impact by doing this. And I chose not to because I was scared, because it would have been because I was scared. And so for me, that's the decision matrix that I use. Different people think of things different ways, but I also was at a point in my life where we were very comfortable. It wasn't that I was quitting my job and we were going to have no money. My husband was working. I was very comfortable. We were comfortable. So it's easier to do that, when you're when you're trying to figure out where to get the dollar to put the food on the table. It's a whole different thought process for sure.
Yeah, great stuff. Yeah, I wrote down, when you were talking through that leap of faith, it takes, and everyone hits that point at a different time in their professional journey, which I think is really key.
Right.
Any other questions for Ro or Jeff, since we have both up on the screen?
Hey, well,
Yeah,
I would say, for the short amount of time that I've known Ro, I could see her as that little brownie, right? She's a born leader, so I'm sure she led her troop. But Ro, thank you for sharing your story. It resonated so much with me. I was in that museum with you, with those twins, and seeing how others reacted because that was a part of the lived experience that I'd had, right? And kudos to you. While you said you were not necessarily babysitting, you weren't babysitting, but you were providing fulfillment for a family. And I always hearken back to that when I think about how we address and involve ourselves with people with disabilities. And so for you to have that at such a young age and it not be in your home, like, for example, me or others, really spoke to the upbringing that you had. And I see how that's made you such a caring and compassionate adult. And certainly for you to decide that you were going to quit your job. I mean, many of us always want to move to the next level, right? And even though you had the support, that still is a lot, right? That's a tough decision. And to Laura's point, taking a leap of faith. So I've made lots of notes as well. So I'm pretty excited. I liked you anyway, but like I put in the chat, love Ro me.
Thank you.
No, that's great stuff. Any other questions for Ro before we take a quick break, and then we'll come back for some additional Q&A with both of our fantastic panelists. Now we have one in the chat from McKinley. Ro and Jeff, I can relate to much of what you're saying. Thank you for investing your time. He's leaving for an 11 a.m. Thank you, McKinley, for taking time this morning to join us. And maybe I will get that proverbial no, not get that proverbial no. So thank you for taking time out to join us. We appreciate it. All right, looks like folks are rolling back in. So we'll go ahead and jump into our last and final section. But first, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dean Brow. Dean is a longtime friend, a Randolph-Macon alum, all those other good things, but is currently the Chief Behavioral Officer for Feedback. And then also, some of you might know him from his work that he started in 2020 with Hidden in Plain Sight, a fantastic project. If you have not taken a look at that, please do so. His resume is extensive, so I won't get that far into it. But Dean, if you would like to do any further introduction before we jump into questions,
you've
feel
done
free
enough,
to do
Laura.
so. Okay.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. No, I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah. So this is really kind of informal, and anyone feel free to drop additional questions in the chat, but we will just kind of popcorn some questions that we wrote down from our notes back and forth to Ro and Jeff. So Dean, I will let you kick off if you like.
Yeah, so it's interesting actually how many threads there were sort of within everything. One of the things I wanted to touch on, which I know like immediately, as soon as I say this, Laura's going to be like, oh crap, and have to cross out like a bunch of her stuff too, because I'm sure we're of a like mind of some of this. You both mentioned, and Jeff in particular, I think really went down an interesting road on imposter syndrome. One of the things I wanted to tie that back to from like a young professional angle, and I say this even, I don't even necessarily think this is always about something that we see early in our lives. I think it's something we could see a lot of even much later, but often, even though we might have a passion for something, and that whether we're talking about that from a volunteer opportunity or not, honestly, it can sometimes feel like you're on the outside of the circle when it comes to the doing, right? I mean, it can be, and honestly, this even ties into why we even started this workshop. I mean, to be really blunt, part of it was this idea that often young professionals are just asked to come to a bar on a given night because the receipts are going to a cause they like. And that's sort of like, often the bandwidth we tend to give volunteerism, at some points. And sometimes it's because it can feel intimidating to start volunteering, or even if you do begin volunteering, the idea of any kind of ladder to try and help more beyond like sort of the entryway, it feels sometimes like a closed circle. And I mean that, even in terms of whether we're talking operations, whether it's talking, of course, especially when you're younger, like the idea of the board just feels like this like strange group of people up on high who make big decisions in robes and like it just feels so alien at times. And I promise there's a question coming with all this storytelling here, but I thought that was some of your points, Jeff, that I knew you were speaking about yourself and even thinking about it in terms of like feeling qualified. Sometimes I know that can be a really big barrier when you're trying to marry your love, passion, appreciation. I think to your point with your experience with your brother, your perspective, right? With a want to do more and feeling like you're on that outside. And how do you get in and affect change, right? How do you get in and be your best self to give your tools? And I think I hope I'm getting the right name. I think Grace, you were talking earlier about, I think with the graphic design and things like that, right? The idea of like, how can I do what I'm amazing at, and benefit others or find new ways to benefit. So I'd love to hear both of you kind of extrapolate even a little bit more of that, especially from whether it's advice or whether it's even just like maybe some thoughts around to try and make that less opaque or feel less of a barrier, or even just, I think you both provided incredible encouragement of like, hey, push through and find that place for you. Just even speaking a little bit more on that. But that it was in both of your stories, right? In different ways. But I just think that's a really important point that I know a lot of young professionals really run into. Either one of you.
Absolutely, Dean. I think what I found is, focusing on your purpose, right? What it is that, and purpose can look different for you, Dean, as opposed to me or Ro or Laura. Whatever that purpose is, if you focus on that, then your passions will follow, right? Because clearly, I will say I spent the greater portion of my career focusing on the work and climbing the corporate ladder, and being promoted and being in the right circles, if you will. And once you've paid your dues there, so to speak, you do get to a point where I believe your experience speaks for itself, or the gravity of your involvements and your relationships kind of speak for themselves. And it affords you the opportunity to be able to give more on the other sides. Like I said, the boards that I've served on that were occupational in nature, I'm still very much involved there. But my passion is those with folks with disabilities. And so that has kind of given me the key, if you will, to be able to push my resources there. And SOAR always rises to the top, right? So you get to a point where certainly I'm professionally going to always try to be an expert and do what I can. But if I'm looking at anyone else who wants me to be a part of something, I've established those boundaries already, Dean, that we won't penetrate. So I think we all do that. I mean, I spoke recently at Virginia State University to some college juniors. I think it was a class of juniors, and I asked them, what they wanted to be and what they were going to do. And, I shared, I graduated from college, and I'm dating myself, but I wanted to be the next Bryant Gumbel, right? I was a mass communications major, and I wanted to be on your television on the Today Show. And that did not happen. But the passion that I had for that, getting there, right? Or attempting to get there, was really what fueled my fire all throughout college. And then I ended up being a banker, right? And then, who wants to be Bryant Gumbel these days anyway? No, I'm joking. But but seriously, I encourage those students that, what you endeavor to do, or what your mind may tell you that you want to do now, may not be what you're doing 20 years from now. But as long as you are purposeful and intentional, again, you'll be exactly where your journey desires for you to be. And for the folks in that room who said they didn't know what, I was like, perfect. You are open, right? Because you're open to whatever opportunities that might be there. So
Those are great points. And Ro, I think your story, just to bridge you in here on this, because I think I mean, it's so funny, looking at your story and thinking about where you've quote unquote ended up, right? Is this idea of you can combine both.
Right.
And I think that seems like a daydream, I think, for many people, because there is this idea of like, whoa, I mean, that's possible. It's not two different universes.
Right. Just to hit a couple things. The first thing that I would say is, when young professionals are thinking about this whole imposter syndrome thing, and I will tell you that most of the technologists that I work with suffer from that. It is not unique by any means. The first thing that I would say is that people who provide value are valuable. And I'm going to jump on that. And that is, if you're if you're volunteering for a nonprofit and you're proving to be someone who is valuable, you are going to naturally kind of rise up in that chain, and you're going to be asked to do different, more impactful things because you're providing value. And that's true in business. I mean, I have people in my organization that are in really senior positions that maybe don't necessarily have the education, but have provided value and have learned along the way. So that's the first thing. On the imposter syndrome thing, I will tell you that when I first started Synergy Technical, we set our rates pretty low, and consulting rates can be really, really high. And I had a dear friend who was a mentor who was introducing us into an organization, and he looked at our rates and he said, Ro, by setting your value here, people are naturally assuming that you don't have a value here. You may choose to say, I'm going to do this work for you at this rate, but here is what I'm really worth. And you have to do the research and the understanding to know what your work is really worth. You may, again, you know, if you're working for a nonprofit and you're doing something either pro bono or for a discounted rate, that's okay and that's great, but that doesn't change what your value is. So you absolutely have to research and know your value. And I think when you do that and people recognize that you have this value, that sense of imposter syndrome can kind of go away. It doesn't always go away completely, but you've got some basis for saying, okay, this is what I'm really worth. I don't know if that helps address that question, but I certainly got that feedback loud and clear.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Just to piggyback on that, one of the things that you said, Jeff, was you were talking about your personal brand. And I think that's a really important thing for a young professional to build or to understand. One of the things when I talk to our new hires every couple of weeks, we talk a lot about core values, right? Our personal core values and an organization's core values and how those things meld. But talk to us a little bit, and then Ro, you can chime in on this too. But, you know, at what point did you really start to understand? You know, you said you wanted to be Bryant Gumbel, but at what point did you start to understand, I want to be Jeff, and this is what Jeff looks like, and this is what's important to Jeff? Because I'm guessing it probably didn't happen immediately after college graduation. So what did that kind of look like for you?
You're exactly right. It didn't start immediately after graduation, but the learning started then, right? The learning started in interviewing. I say to folks all the time, I've interviewed for way more jobs that I haven't gotten than I've gotten, right? And so how you build that personal brand starts every day, and it evolves. It evolves over time. I would say the circle of influence that I built around me was helpful to help me understand that oh my God, to Ro's point, people who provide value are valuable, right? It really helped me to understand that I provided value in the space that I was in. I like to think of myself as a connector, a relationship builder. My early career in retail banking, you know, becoming, you know, a family's financial advisor, so to speak, was a huge undertaking, right? And ensuring that we're providing advice and guidance, but we also have to be accountable for it. Now, fortunately for me, I worked for large financial institutions that could be backed up, but it was all about building that brand as from a day-to-day standpoint. And I would say from young professionals starting off, that clearly my resume has been that I've built on every previous job. So I've taken something from a previous role and brought that into it to become a better person. But you're right, it doesn't happen overnight. But when you recognize you are your brand, and when you walk in to a boardroom, you walk into your job, you walk into HR, that you have to be the best brand, to be the best you that you are. that makes a difference. And it kind of forces you to do things differently.
I
And I
want
did want to say, Laura, real quick, I don't want to cut you off, Dean. I
please.
so appreciate Rose's organizational expertise, because what she said about her giving back is that she's built a company and that's the culture.
Right.
So you know immediately, right? If you want to be a part of this culture, this is what we do. And I'm sure that causes her to kind of ask some of her team of experts to do things, and they're not necessarily going to be paid for it. But here's what you signed up for, because this is our culture. I just think that's beautiful, because that doesn't happen, just like I said in the chat, not even in large companies, that a culture happens that way.
To piggyback on the personal branding, Jeff and I have the advantage that we were not young professionals when social media existed.
Mm.
And social media is really, really important. I have the unique perspective in that I work with and have relationships with quite a few Division I athletes who are in really high profile areas and on TV all the time. And what I would strongly encourage anyone who's a young professional now is keep an eye on that social media presence, because the internet is forever. And the last thing you want to have happen is something end up on social media where you were portrayed in a not so flattering light, because that's going to make it to somebody somewhere. It just is. And social media is really powerful. So as you're building your personal brand, you have the opportunity to put out there, and it's not fake, to put out there who you are, who you volunteer with and the events that you attend and the impact that you make. And that's all really super impactful. And that's going to help as you move along your career. People like me are going to look at that when we go to hire you and say, hey, this is somebody that I really think would be a great part of my organization because they care about giving back. And these are the organizations that they support. So I think that is so very, very important. And the athletes that I have relationships with, I caution them all the time, you do not want to be putting stuff on social media that you do not want to be reflective of your brand. And we're just in a different place now than Jeff and I were, for sure. And I say thank God for me. I will tell you.
Yeah, well, bro, you went actually exactly where I was going to go, which is, I think, really succinctly, and I think to pull in everything that you both have talked about, which is what you care about is a part of, if not in some cases, your entire personal brand.
Right.
And that goes to, what you care about, from where you may want to volunteer, even if you haven't been able to, even if it's the things that you're passionate about, the people or creatures or institutions that you want to support. That's what then makes it, as you gain in your ability to affect change, as Ro has, right? And as Jeff pointed out, you then can make it part of the culture of the brand of who you're working with, right? So that then what the organization cares about, it's a part of that brand. And I think that is something that we often compartmentalize so much. And I'm as guilty about it as anybody, right? Work life, passionate life, whatever. Like, we are so good at siloing those things. But I got to tell anybody listening that, if you're in one of those interviews and you start talking about something you care about, we can tell.
Yep.
We can tell the minute you
Absolutely.
do. And the fact that you spend the energy caring tells us something about you.
Yep.
And I think that's where you get that you are your brand. What you care about is a part of that brand too.
Yeah, just to echo on that, and I know we're just about out of time, but something that Jeff said that really resonated with me. So, full disclosure, LMR class of 2022, best class ever, but it's okay. We won't go there. But, one of the things that those types of conversations like Jeff had with Vanessa, when you start to authentically talk about the things that are important to you in any circle, regardless of what that circle is, whether it's with coworkers, whether it's in a learning environment like that, you start to make those connections. So Dean, back to your earlier point about how do we break down those walls to get a seat at the table or to feel more comfortable in those spaces, it truly comes back to being, you know, your authentic self and saying, these are the things that are important to me and why. And I think Jeff did that, you know, in that conversation with Vanessa. It was important to you, right? You were talking about something that you were incredibly passionate about. You knew that all along, but having that conversation kind of sparked that momentum, if you will, to go find, you know, somewhere else to be involved. So I think that's a really valid point as well. So
You're
any
absolutely
closing
right, Laura.
thoughts? Yeah, Jeff or Ro, any closing thoughts there?
I was going to say you're absolutely right, Laura, and thank you for bringing up Vanessa. Vanessa connected me with Clint Kelly, who connected me with John, and here we are on the board. And Vanessa travels quite a bit, and like you guys, you can see Vanessa's iPhone. So I told her about this long ago and asked her if she'd be able to support. So a huge public thank you to Vanessa for that, but also thank you for the invitation today. I've learned so much more about my good friend Ro, and it is funny how parallel paths cross. So this has been the highlight of my day.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, this has been awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Well, right on time there. Dean, any last words or thoughts before we wrap
No,
up?
just thank you both for sharing and you know, again, just being so vulnerable and so open with us. It's I know appreciated by those here and those will be watching after the fact, and it's really truly a gift.
Awesome. Well, with that, again, you know, just in closing, thank you all for taking time out of your Saturday mornings. It is a beautiful Saturday, so hopefully you can get out and enjoy it now. Again, a thank you to our sponsor, Tito's. We do have our fall social coming up on October 24th at Brambley Park. It's a lot of fun. It's a fantastic venue if you have not been before, so please join us. This is a photo from our last one. And hopefully that weather will hold, but really just a sincere thank you to everyone. If you're interested in learning more about NGC or SOAR365, please reach out to any of us on the panel or Adelia or Michelle or anyone else from the organization today. So with that, we will send you on your way, but thank you again for joining us this morning.